friend, and welcome back to the Alex Makes VR podcast. In today's episode, I thought we'd touch on a slightly hyperbolic and controversial topic. Is VR filmmaking dead? And you'll know what my opinion on that is before we even dive into the episode, but this topic has come to mind off the back of watching the recent Sundance Film Festival New Frontier selection. It's a conversation that I've been having offline with a lot of creators, but I wanted to bring the conversation online, throw it out into a public forum so that we can start having an open and honest dialogue about the state of virtual reality in terms of an entertainment format. So we're going to dive into all of that in today's episode. If you would like to suggest a subject or a topic for future episodes, I would love to hear from you. It's Alex Makes VR on Instagram and Twitter. And every single Monday when these episodes go live, I send out a newsletter directly to your inbox to give you the key takeaways. Also serves as a nice little logbook almost through the weeks of tips and tricks to build a career or a business in virtual reality that you will love. So if you want to sign up for that, you can do so at alexmakesvr.com. Let's dive into the episode. I have to be very, very honest and say that I've recorded 3 different versions of this episode, and each one has been about half an hour long. And each one I finished and I just thought, I don't want to release that into the world. So this is actually the 3rd attempt at me trying to get this episode right. And the reason I think it's so difficult to talk about this subject is, and it is a very divisive subject within the industry at large, is because, and this is the conclusion I've come to over the past 48 hours of attempting to record this episode, is that the definitions of what VR filmmaking is are still so undefined. When I talk about VR filmmaking, I'm talking about actual film-based content. I'm talking about 360 video. I'm talking about volumetric video. I'm talking about photorealistic film-based content that is story-driven and character-led. The kind of thing that you would put on Netflix, fictional content, scripted content, the kind of content that dominates the entertainment space for the general population. But that is not necessarily the definition that everyone has for VR filmmaking, and everyone is absolutely entitled to their own definition. There is a lot of infighting in the VR industry, which is so counterproductive. Is 360 filmmaking VR? Where is the line? Does it have to be game-based? Does it have to be live action? Does it have to be real-time rendered? Does it have to be interactive? Does it have to be multi-choice? Does it have to be, there's so many different variations and there's so many different opinions on that subject. And I've come to realize that is one of the biggest hurdles for us as an industry, is we can't decide what things are and what we call them and how we define them, which makes it really difficult then to go out and recruit new people to the industry or to give exposure in any particular niche, which will then encourage more people to get into it, because we ourselves don't really know what it is. And that's quite important, I think, because this whole episode was inspired by a experience that I had with the Sundance Film Festival this year, which I think I talked about in the intro. And again, I'm really sorry. I recorded the intro is the same for every version of this episode that I've recorded. So I've recorded it so many times, I can't actually remember what I said in the intro now. But just to give you a little behind the scenes. But I think I mentioned that this topic kind of resurged, however you say that word. Resurged. No, okay, I gotta stop. You know when you say a word too much and you're like, am I going insane? That's not a word. Okay, this topic came up after I watched the Sundance selection, and I won't go into too in depth about that experience. Overall, I thought that the fact that they had to take the physical film festival and create an online platform of all of these different interactive and XR works that could be as widely accessible as possible across multiple devices whilst keeping everyone happy was an impossible task, essentially. I would have liked maybe a bit more heads up about the fact that, like, if you've only got a computer, these are the experiences that you'll be able to do, you know, however many that is, like 6 out of the 14 or something. If you've got a mobile phone, these are, you know, if you've got a Quest, this is how many experiences you can do. If you've got a tethered headset, you'll be able to do them all. I would have liked that up top, because the thing that frustrated me was I only have a Quest at home at the moment. I can't access my tethered headset setup, which, you know, candidly isn't even mine. It's just like a shared tethered headset that we use in a co-working space. The reason for that is the majority of the work that I do doesn't require a tethered headset, and the clients that I work with, they're not interested in paying thousands of pounds to distribute the VR work that we do together. They want a portable, fairly cheap, scalable solution, and the Quest is generally that, especially the Quest 2. But I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. Let me bring it back on topic. So that would have been nice to have some transparency right up top. But the thing, regardless of the fact that, and full disclosure, I didn't get to see all the pieces because quite a few of them were tethered. The content that was available, I was not necessarily enthralled by. I think the main reason for that, and the reason why this kind of topic came up in my head, was because as a fan of filmmaking and as a fan of narrative, fictional, scripted content, like the kind of content that is part of the Sundance legacy, the main film festival, a film festival that has launched the careers of Kevin Smith and Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez, all of these iconic independent filmmakers. I was really disappointed that hasn't translated over to the kind of XR selection as part of New Frontiers. And there's a number of reasons for that. And I won't go into them in this, but I just want to say right up top that I'm not suggesting by any stretch of the imagination that I don't understand the challenges that would have been confronting the curators and the facilitators of this year's selection. But this goes for all of the film festivals. Even pre-COVID times, they lean towards more of an arts-based crowd for the XR arm to the film festivals. They lean towards experimental, conceptual pieces, not necessarily story-based, character-driven content. And there could be a number of reasons for that. So many reasons, including the fact that some people just flat out don't like film-based VR content. There is always a lot of heated debate around whether or not 360 films can be considered true virtual reality, which is not a subject that I'm going to cover in this episode, but all I'll say on the subject is if it's consumed in a VR headset, it is VR. End of story. There's a number of reasons, including personal taste by the curators, by the fact that they're limited in space usually, and the way that they curate has to very much align with the budget that they've got to showcase on a certain amount of headsets. And you know, I'm not going to discount all of those arguments for why we are seeing more arts-based content, but this got me thinking about what it is about this space that is preventing more filmmakers from wanting to jump in. Because I know for me personally as a filmmaker, the first time I put on a VR headset, I was blown away. And it wasn't even really that the piece I was watching was narrative. It was, I mean, one of the first pieces that I saw within like a while of knowing what VR was scripted. It was the Mr. Robots piece. I've talked about that several times on this podcast. But the very first piece I saw, I believe, was Felix and Paul's Dreams of O, which is just a performance piece. But even just watching that, it blew me away, and it blew me away to the kind of possibilities that we would have in this medium. And I can't say that I'm not surprised. Hang on, that was a double negative. Let me reword that. I'm very surprised that more filmmakers haven't had that same experience as me. Now, it could be that they've just not had the experience, full stop. It could be that they've actually never put on a VR headset and seen a piece of film-based virtual reality. It could be that the main exposure that they've had to VR is in a gaming capacity, or in a social VR capacity, or in a horror experience or something. All really brilliant ways of bringing people into VR, obviously, and the way that you have your first experience in VR, I guess, very much sets the tone for the kind of work that you want to pursue. But I can't help but feel like film festivals should absolutely be the kind of place that opens the door to filmmakers and says, this medium is for you. You, Carol, who's been working on that feature film that you've shot on an iPhone and scrapped together the budget for, but you're so desperate to tell the story of your relationship with your mother and her struggle with addiction, or whatever it is, the classic kind of indie filmmaker stuff. Like, why isn't that person seeing VR and saying, this is really interesting? How can I tell stories with this medium? And to me, I think it is because these film festivals are not giving the exposure to that kind of work. And of course, just like with anything in life, if you don't see it, you wouldn't know it was possible. And I have to say, from my point of view, and again, all of this is I totally appreciate it's all subjective, and this is just my personal opinion. But I can't help but think that if and when I have gone to these arts-based exhibitions for VR, and the UK festivals are not exempt from this, they do it too. It's all set up in a very artsy way, and it's all very much, you've kind of got to have the nice aesthetic to your exhibition of VR, so that the people that are waiting to do the VR experience are still entertained, and it looks visually pretty rather than just, a room full of random headsets dangling from a ceiling, or a room of people in chairs watching VR. I understand that to some extent, there is a bit of that going on, that you need to kind of make it appealing for the people that are standing around waiting. But in that scenario, I've been really intimidated because I am not from an arts background. I find the world candidly a little bit pretentious, and I find it really difficult to feel welcome in a space like that. Now, luckily, I have the privilege now of being someone where I know quite a few people in the industry, so now it's a little bit less intimidating because I can go into those spaces, and usually I'll know someone, and it makes it all a little bit less cringy. But I can't help but feel like the average filmmaker who wants to explore immersive storytelling might not, and again, this is complete conjecture, might not feel welcome in these spaces that we're creating in what are supposed to be the world-leading showcases of immersive storytelling. I have to say that as the average filmmaker, as one person's opinion, as an average filmmaker, speaking on behalf of filmmakers, some of the work that I see in VR, I'm left thinking, I don't get it. Am I supposed to get it? And it's the exact same feeling that I have when I walk around art galleries, and I can be obviously I can totally appreciate art for what it is. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for artists. But I can't help but feel it's that same thing of like, oh, I don't get it. So therefore, I don't feel like I can play in that space, because that's not really, it's very different, right? As in, the filmmaking community and the artist community are two very different kind of breeds of people. And yes, there's crossover. And yes, an artist can be a filmmaker because visual artists do use film for their art. But also a filmmaker can make art. There's, countless amount of filmmakers whose visual style and their aesthetic and the way that they go about producing films is absolutely more in line with what you would consider visual art than it is film. So this is where it gets a bit messy. But just, you know what I'm getting at. Filmmakers, when I'm saying filmmakers, I'm saying like the kind of people that want a story, they want the hero's journey, they want to follow a character, they want to be sucked in, they want an emotional connection with the thing that they're watching. They don't want to always, anyway, be confronted by a conceptual abstract piece that is supposed to represent a big theme or idea. And don't get me wrong, I can throw down with the best of them on like philosophy and what a lot of art says about the world and us as a species and all of the problems that we have and social issues and injustice. Totally understand, and it's very important. I'm not saying that it's not important that we have artists' work. I'm just saying that we're not necessarily allowing a space to showcase the best of VR filmmaking so that the average filmmaker feels welcome in this industry. I'm already 15 minutes in and I'm like nowhere near finished on this subject, but I'm going to try and be as concise as possible. So those are like my thoughts on the subject. My thoughts are people aren't seeing the work, so therefore they don't feel included and they feel intimidated. But there are also obviously much bigger challenges. If you said to the average filmmaker, hey, you know how it's really difficult already to sustain a living with filmmaking. You know how that feature film that you've spent like your life savings on and you got your mum to act in it and you've used all of your mates' locations with the hope that it would premiere at a festival, get picked up by a distributor, and then maybe you would make your money back. But mostly it would just be cool to get it on Netflix and say that you had a film on Netflix. Cool. Now go tell that same filmmaker that you want them to create that same story, that same piece, that same passion project. Not that they're always passion projects, but go tell them that they're going to do the same thing in a medium that costs 5 times as much minimum, that is harder to grapple with, that has its own cinematic language that they don't know yet and no one knows. And then tell them that it's going to be really difficult to get it to an audience, that there is no built-in distribution channel, that there is no Netflix to try and send it to. There is no channel that you can easily get it in front of thousands, millions of people like you would do if you uploaded it to YouTube and put a bit of ad spend behind it. What about that seems appealing to a filmmaker? And that is the truth. That is where we're at right now. Maybe the artist is more inclined to experiment because that is the nature of art. That is the nature of artists. They want to experiment more. They are more willing. They're not expecting often to make a killing off of the back of the work. A lot of the artists that I know, the whole starving artist is a meme at this point, but it's a cliche for a reason. And it's because artists generally, and again, I am generalizing here, they have so much conviction around the idea that they want to portray through their work that they will use whatever medium fits the purpose. Whereas filmmakers, they want to tell their stories through their specific medium with the hope of getting it to more people, right? And also we're going with the likes of YouTube and influencer culture. We are seeing that video and filmmaking is on a pedestal right now. I mean, it kind of always has been, but it's never been more accessible to be a traditional 2D filmmaker. Like I said, there have been films that have been nominated for awards at Sundance and other iconic film festivals that have been made literally on iPhones. The technology that you need to make a film that 100 years ago, or even 10 years ago, would have been tremendously expensive, required a lot of skill, a lot of equipment. Now you can do that on such a low budget that we're having a bit of a boom in people that want to pursue filmmaking in loads of different arenas, which is super exciting. But now tell those people to come into a space where there aren't as many people doing it. There aren't as many opportunities for getting paid. There aren't as many opportunities to showcase their work, because even film festivals don't program film-based content. Again, none of that would seem appealing on the surface. But I believe genuinely that if more filmmakers were aware of the potential of this medium, if more filmmakers heard that classic speech about how where we are right now in VR is very, very similar to the early days of cinema. Sorry, I've got that mixed up, haven't I? If more filmmakers knew that where we are right now in VR is very similar to where we were in cinema 100 years ago, and that if they got in now, they could be part of the pioneers to define the medium, to discover the language, to experiment, and everything is up for grabs. And it's a hardcore community of passionate people that work together and have loads and loads of opinions on stuff. And you might not be able to get your work to a wide audience, but you will be able to impact a small amount of people much more than maybe with your short film that you've put on Vimeo. The fact that I've been filmmaking and working in and around filmmakers, in television and in advertising and in short films, etc., for years now. I was literally making my first short films with my brother when I was 11, 12. Some of those are still cringily on YouTube. Will not be telling you where you can see them, but nothing compared to the first time I showed my parents the VR piece that I'd created. Nothing compared to the impact that had, compared to a little kind of short film that you can watch on a TV or a phone. Nothing compares to putting someone in a headset and letting them live the story. If more filmmakers knew that, if more filmmakers heard that and saw this space as an opportunity, yes, you're not going to get rich right now. Yes, it's going to be hard. Yes, the odds are all stacked against us. There is a question mark hanging over the whole format as to whether or not it will survive in the years to come. But part of the fun is being part of the group of people that tested that theory and that got to tell their stories in this medium and be the people that defined it. Then VR filmmaking wouldn't be dead. It would be thriving. And yes, of course, we need to solve these distribution problems. We need to solve, we need more audiences in it. We need more, and it's catch-22, right? Because we need more audiences to want to consume this kind of work, but those audiences won't come until this kind of work exists. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. But the kind of content that I've always wanted to work since I jumped into this industry 5 or so years ago is the kind of content that the general population would like. In fact, I remember, let me tell you this anecdote. I remember so vividly, the last VR cinema that I put on was for a group of executives and employees at the BFI, the British Film Institute. This is the body that is funding my next VR piece. This was after I'd secured that funding, just FYI. But I put it on as a way of showcasing the potential. So I showed them a couple of pieces of work that were film-based work, story-led work. And one of the pieces of feedback, I mean, don't get me wrong, everyone really enjoyed it. But one of the pieces of feedback that one of the executives gave was, well, this is great, but I don't see much content that is just light-hearted, just light-hearted, nice stories. Like everything I see in VR is so intense and dark and conceptual and thematic, and it's so highbrow. There's nothing for the average cinema goer. There's nothing that would be, you know, a top 10 trending on Netflix. There's nothing that's like really, really accessible. And then I showed them Key to Light, which was the first project that I ever made in VR. And they were like, you know, this is an example of a piece that is exactly that. It is a super low-key, down-paired, character-focused, story-focused, film-based project that any cinema goer could get into. And even that piece, obviously, it has its problems and it's my own, so of course I'm biased with that. But she was like, but where's the rest of it? And I'm like, that is a problem, because there aren't many filmmakers working in the space. So therefore, and let's be real, even the select people that are working in this industry, we all have different taste. We all have different ideas of what we want to make. It's not right for a lot of people to make a character, a female-led dystopian drama like I want to make. I want to make that because that's the kind of content that I want to see, that I want to make, the stories that I want to tell. But that's not necessarily the same as what you're going to do. That's not the same as someone else wants to do. They want to tell a documentary story about a jazz musician. They want to follow an astronaut. They want to tell a story about addiction. They want to tell a story about, nightmares. Like there's obviously there's so many different things, but because there's such a small group of filmmakers working in the industry, there isn't enough of a cross section of genres to even entice different audiences in. Does that make sense? Okay, I've gone on such a ramble. I want to just finish off by saying, when I recorded the first 2 versions of this podcast, like I said, I got in my head a bit, and I just kind of wanted to gut check with the rest of my fellow creatives how they were feeling about this subject. I wanted to kind of get out of my own head and get out of my own bias, because absolutely this topic and this conversation comes from a place of the fact that I selfishly want VR filmmaking to succeed, to thrive, because that's what I want to do. But I wanted to gut check against the rest of the industry. I wanted to gut check against a group of other creative professionals. So instead of just having private conversations, I put it to a public forum and asked a load of questions in a Facebook group with a load of professional VR creators. And I want to just share with you something that I thought was quite interesting, which is I put a poll out to say, basically, in a nutshell, why does VR attract more artists than filmmakers? And the number one reason that people voted for in the poll was the lack of distribution for VR films. So it makes people less interested to jump in, which I've already touched on in this episode. Absolutely, it makes sense. What kind of sadomasochist like me wants to create work that essentially no one, figuratively saying, no one will see? The second one was that grants and festivals tend to focus on arts-based VR work, so it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Again, we've touched on this, that idea of if you can't see it, you won't believe that you can do it. If you don't see more VR film-based work being shown, you won't see that there is a space for you in this industry. You will see it as, you've got to be like a mocap live performer, theatre designer to get into VR, or you've got to be an incredible Pixar level animator to get into VR, or you've got to have some abstract, conceptual acid trip visions of a VR project to get into VR, because those stages that we are kind of showcasing what is supposed to be what represent the best of the best in immersive storytelling, that's the story that those pieces are telling. The next one is that it works better as an artistic platform than a traditional film approach. And I am not oblivious to the fact that that could definitely be the case. That 360 filmmaking to VR is like 3D filmmaking is to traditional feature films. Like, maybe it's not enough to be in a headset. Maybe having that kind of full body experiential artistic experience is more appealing than that passive film-based approach. That could absolutely be something that we see going forward in this industry that prevails, is that maybe not, maybe this isn't, maybe in future I'd still fundamentally believe, regardless of what happens with VR filmmaking, that VR will be huge. VR will essentially change all of our lives in so many different ways that we can't fathom now. But maybe the way that we consume films in VR will be that we all sit in a virtual cinema together, because we can't be asked, or there's no such thing as a physical, well, don't get me wrong, there will still be physical cinemas, I'm sure, even in like 20, 30 years. But let's say we just don't want to leave the sofa, but we want to go to the cinema with our mates and see the latest release movie. Like, maybe we enter a virtual cinema to do that, because we're still consuming it in a space with our friends, but it's just like a normal film. Like, I'll never forget one of the times I was working on a VR project for a hospice, and this kid was running around like with his parent, and he was like, "Hey, I've got one of those," pointing to my headset. And I said, "Oh yeah, what apps do you like to use?" And he was like, "Oh, sometimes I like to watch Netflix on there because I can't be bothered to hold my iPad in bed." And I thought that, in a nutshell, says everything about, well, about everything really, doesn't it? About digital, the age of digital, and also Generation Z. No shade to Generation Z, of course, but isn't that interesting? Oh, I wanted to watch Netflix because in VR, I can sit in this like mansion with a screen the size of a cinema screen to watch my VR shows, rather than just holding an iPad or watching it on a laptop or watching it on a TV. Now I can have as big a screen as I like and watch it in comfort, as long as my head can withstand the VR headset. I thought that was really interesting. What else we got here? Lack of reciprocity for VR film producers to cover the expense of producing, distributing and marketing. So again, financials. The financials don't add up in this space. And currently, just like the festivals focus on more arts-based projects, a lot of public funding focuses on arts-based projects too. Here in the UK, up until really, really recently, aka my project is one of the first, well, it is the first ever VR project funded by the BFI network here in England, which is a film-based institute. Before that, for the last however many years, the only grant body that will commission or fund VR work has been Arts Council England. It's innately an artistic medium because it is experimental, because it is new. And so because the grants are focused at artists, that's the kind of work that gets funded. That's the kind of work that gets showcased. It makes sense. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I'm going to end this episode there because I've already talked for quite a while. It's interesting that no matter which version of the episode I did, it always ended at around the half an hour mark. Clearly, that's my ceiling for rambling to you guys. I'm sure you'll be pleased to know. Let me know what you thought of this episode. It's a really hard topic to cover without getting really emotional about it one way or another, because you might be listening to this and you might be an artist, so you might have very strong opinions, or you might think it's a great thing that there's more experimental, experiential, full body kind of work being showcased on these big platforms, because usually it's reserved for, you know, smaller art exhibitions. But let me hear your thoughts. I would love for this to open a dialogue, because one of the things that I really loved about posting about this on Facebook Facebook in the group was that it opened up this really engaging, honest conversation. I've not seen that many VR creatives jump in on a conversation and start debating back and forth in a really civil way, just coming from their own kind of opinions and standpoints. I haven't seen that happen in the VR industry for a long, long time. And it's important. It's important that we open these conversations, we open these channels to have these hard dialogues, because I'm very okay with 90% of you saying, nope, it's dead, Alex. Let it go. And I'll make bad news and I'll be on my way for sure. I'll just carry on soldiering on in the background, and I won't, mutter another word on the subject. But it's important that we do kind of chat and pulse check where everyone's at and what everyone else is feeling, especially if you yourself are a filmmaker. Know that you are not alone in feeling that. So reach out to me on Instagram and Twitter. It's Alex Makes VR. And if you want to join in on that conversation, the Facebook group that I've been alluding to is the 360 and VR Professionals group on Facebook. That's it for this episode. Cannot wait to hear your thoughts. If you like this episode, it would mean the world to me if you screenshotted the podcast that you're listening to right now and share it on your social medias and tag me. It just helps get the word out. Podcasts aren't innately very shareable, especially because people listen on different platforms. But if you could just, share a screenshot, let me know what you thought of this episode, tag me. That would do wonders in terms of helping other people discover the podcast, which in turn helps me. So that would be lovely. Have a great day wherever you are in the world, and I will speak to you again very soon.